Hi, this is Pete, welcome to my channel. I must admit that my Pro-800 videos so far have mainly been addressed to advanced users. So I think it's time to change this a bit, and in fact I remember well that also Pete Meaty started as a pure beginner one day. So in this video I will try to provide some comparison guide for choosing the best first synth, and at the same time I will answer the question whether the Behringer Pro-800 is a perfect candidate. Obviously the Pro-800 is a synth module without an included keyboard, but must a first synthesizer come with a built-in keyboard? I think today you have a broad range of different options for playing a synthesizer. You may start with a simple cheap keyboard, but you can also use pads or just an internal or external sequencer. Often the built-in keyboards are compromised and not well suitable for bigger hands. So I think it's a good idea to answer the two questions for a first synth and a suitable controller separately. Therefore, a synth module without a keyboard is definitely not a bad choice for a first synthesizer. Now let's take a look at the price. For the first synth you cannot be sure if this will become an everlasting love, so it's clear that there must be an upper limit. It's Behringer's secret how they achieved to offer a real analog polysynth well below the magic $500 bound. This is a hard goal for competitors, but I think it's also a realistic limit for beginners. But must a first synthesizer be polyphonic? I really have a large number of monophonic and paraphonic synths, but I would not recommend these for synth beginners. For me, chords and chord progressions are very important, and I think it's a good idea to play with these building blocks of nearly all kinds of music right from the beginning. The Pro-800 comes with 8 voices, which is really great for all kinds of electronic music. In principle, also 4 voices are sufficient at the beginning, but if you become a more advanced user, you will realize that this is not that much. Next question you may ask is, what kind of sound engine is the best choice? Should it be analog, digital, hybrid or anything else? In principle, this question cannot be answered without knowing the user interface. The only thing that I can state here is that the sound engine should provide some range that is broad enough for an extensive exploration. The Pro-800 is a typical analog synthesizer with a classical 2-oscillator low-pass filter combination. So the sound universe is limited somehow, but nevertheless it is large enough for a beginner. Thanks to the 2 oscillators, you really have a broad range of excellent analog sounds with a lot of interesting variations to discover. Perhaps the user interface is the most critical part for a beginner, because it should make it possible to quickly learn how to vary sounds according to your imagination. Therefore, control elements with multiple functions or a display-centered control concept, in my opinion, are not optimal at the beginning, because they complicate the direct interaction with the sound engine. For example, I would not recommend the Dreadbox Nymphes. The 6-voice real analog sound engine is really great and in principle well suitable for beginners. However, the user interface with a few multifunctional faders and switches is not that nice, and I guess for a beginner it's absolutely no fun to learn this synthesizer by trial and error. Because of a missing display, you can only speculate about the current state of the sound engine, and at the end also advanced users will long for a software editor. Meanwhile, there are several editors, but if you need this, you must honestly ask, what's the benefit of such a hardware synth for a beginner in comparison to a software plugin? And we can get even worse with the user interface if we look at the Volca FM. The new version FM2 has 6 digital voices and can generate all those classical DX7 sounds from the 80s. But the user interface to edit the core sound parameters is a nightmare. So you will definitely need a software editor to really unfold the potential of this synth. The Korg Op6 is a significant improvement, but I think the complexity is still not suitable for beginners. I could continue the long list of examples for insufficient first user interfaces, and some cases may perhaps give rise to discussion, but in my opinion, the tiny nanobox devices, the Waldorf Blofeld, the Roland MC101, the Novation Mini Nova, the Modal Cobalt 5S and also the Microkorg are not the best choice for beginners. In contrast, the user interface of the Pro-800 is nearly perfect for a beginner. You have dedicated knobs and switches for almost all sound parameters. The only multifunctional knob is the value knob. This one you need for a few additional parameters that you reach via the menu. All in all, the user interface is very close to a what you see is what you hear realization. You can store your sounds in 400 preset slots, which you can easily back up on a computer via MIDI. However, if you recall a sound from memory, the knobs and switches do not reflect the actual parameters anymore. But you have the possibility to return to the knob values just by hitting the performance button twice. This is an essential option for beginners and also a lifesaver for more advanced users. You also have a built-in arpeggiator and a simple polyphonic sequencer, which may also be helpful at the beginning. At that point, you may ask if there are still alternatives to the Pro-800 or if this would be my one and only recommendation. No, definitely not. In terms of the features per price ratio, there are still a few competitors, and actually the strongest one for me is the Roland JX08. This virtual analog synth is inspired by the classical JX8P, but I do not want to discuss here whether it is a good or bad match with regard to the original. I actually think that for a beginner this is not a relevant question, so let's concentrate on the more important features. First of all, the modern JX comes with a lot of voices. The actual number depends a bit on the sound configuration, but it is always in the range between 18 and 20. This opens up some nice possibilities. In particular, you can split the synth into two units with different sounds and different stereo panning if you want. What I like about the user interface is that all important parameters have their own knobs or faders. The two-oscillator sound engine is rather flexible, nevertheless it's relatively easy to understand and you can find a lot of interesting sounds just by trial and error. There are several additional parameters which can only be adjusted through the menu, but all in all I find the user interface a feasible compromise for a first synth. There are built-in effects, a simple polyphonic sequencer, and you have the possibility to connect the Roland keyboard docking station, which you can buy separately as for all devices of the Roland Boutique series. From this series, some people consider the Juno variant as the better synth. I do not agree with this. For me, the limitation to 4 voices in comparison with the JX and the Pro-800 does not make sense for a beginner. Also, the JD08 would not be an alternative for me due to the awkward user interface. A disadvantage of all boutique synths is that the USB port is not class compliant, which currently is not a problem if you stay with Windows or Mac OS. Then you can even see this as an advantage because the Roland USB driver supports audio, so you do not need a separate audio interface to record this synth within the computer. For the Pro-800 you definitely need an additional audio interface for recording, and together with a MIDI controller you quickly reach the $500 price limit. In addition, you will need some effects processor, but you do not need an expensive pedal effect. In all of my Pro-800 demos, I just use the reverb plugin that runs on my iPad. With this, the sound in my ears is far superior to the JX08, and you may imagine, for me, the Pro-800 actually would be the perfect first synth today. and I'm quite sure that the original Prophet 600 would have been a best first polysynth for me in 1983. But at that time the price of the Prophet in Europe was clearly out of reach, at least for me. A few years later I got it used at some very reasonable rate, but when I began to study I had to sell all of my synths. So I'm very happy that Behringer now provides some well-extended remake, and I had a lot of fun with my Pro-800 in the last weeks. I hope you will also hear this in the following jam. That's all I want to say. Don't forget to subscribe, stay healthy and stay tuned.